started with the movie. Papers due Friday night, one in a Saturday night at midnight. I always like to have those weird deadlines like that, just to give you guys a little bit more time. So anything that I can address about the paper, the writing of the paper, anything like that, this is your last chance before to ask questions before it's due. So anything like that I can answer right now.
Was there like a minimum that you was wanting, like page wise or word wise or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I said about 3 to 4 pages is that's kind of what I'm looking for. If you have, I mean, that's arbitrary too. Like, let's say you have 2.5 pages, but there's a really good 2.5 pages, right? That's, I would take that into consideration. I'm not gonna, but if it's super short, yeah, that's a problem. Even if it's super long, that can be a problem too, right? Sometimes length does not always correlate with success. I once had a girl in my class, like, I'd say like 3 to 4 pages, and she'd write like 12. I'm just like, what the hell? Why are you doing this to me? She was brilliant. She was brilliant, but she always did that to me. I would always joke with her. I'm like, come on, Anna, what are you doing? Right, so
I think you did say on the handout that no more than 5.
Yeah, no more than 5 if you can help it. And make sure you have a good thesis. My best advice for best practice in your intro, keep your intro relatively short. But get straight to the point with your intro. Get a solid thesis statement. So this is my argument I'm making about that movie, because then you can like list out your reasons. And then once you get to the body of the paper, just like how you would in a literature class, remember that in a literature class, the text is your evidence. Well, in the movie class, it's the same thing, but the movie's your evidence. So like I would recommend definitely using some scenes. Talk about a few scenes in the movie to break down your point. And then even if you want to get into film analysis, like look at what the camera does here. Look what the soundtrack does here. Even one of the questions was about soundtrack alone, if I remember. Right, but if you can do that, bring in some film elements too, in addition to whatever thematic elements you're analyzing, you will do well. So, what questions are you guys picking? What have you guys? I'm sure some of you have started it by now, or procrastinators might be waiting a little bit, even longer, right? But what questions are you guys gravitating to with it so far?
I'm going with Miss Ratchet or Nurse Ratchet and
Murphy.
Yeah, I'm going on their conflict back and forth. How one will pull one way, one pulls the other.
That was mine too, Crystal.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I can change mine.
Nah, I mean, if you've already started, you can go. You're
Well, I mean, I've started in my head, but I haven't started on with my fingers. You got me to pick something else, so you're not reading about the same thing 100 times.
No, that's all right. You do what you want.
Picked one off based off like my favorite movie out of the ones we watched, and that one was it.
That's what I did too. That was my favorite I've watched so far.
I'm doing the Apocalypse Now. What's a scene that was added to it, which was the rescue of the little girl. Yeah, anyway, that's what I'm doing. Even though it's probably, the scene itself is probably not a minute long. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah, when you think of the added scenes, you think of like the 20-minute Vietnam or the French scene and all that stuff. Like a really short scene like that'll be interesting, especially for the scope of a 3 to 4 page paper.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Kirsten says she's doing the Grapes of Wrath topic. So yeah, I'll get a healthy mix of variety here. So yeah, I agree with all of you guys. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's just one of those movies, right? It's top 5 of all time, easily, in my estimation. The more I watch Chinatown, the more that movie grows on my list. Like,
Me too.
today's film, The Searchers, is another. It's one of these movies. This is one of these movies that all the directors today cite is one of their top 5. Like, most directors love this movie. Steven Spielberg loves this movie. Martin Scorsese loves this movie. Like, The Searchers is the American Film Institute ranks The Searchers as the top Western movie ever made. Yeah, so this movie that we're watching today is very highly lauded as like one of the top Westerns ever. It kind of so just to give my normal introductory spiel, it kind of breaks my heart a little just to teach 3 Westerns in this class, because Westerns are probably my favorite. I've taught an entire class just on Westerns before. So we cover the whole genre, right? So like narrowing it down to 3 was hard for me. But the Searchers is one of these great iconic Westerns from, of course, the genre was at its peak popularity in the late 30s up through the early 70s. Okay, that's when the genre was at its popularity. Of course, just like we've talked before in this class with the Vietnam War and stuff like that, the 70s was a much more pessimistic decade in America. So the Western genre kind of died out for a long time after the 70s. There were still some, but they were definitely not as prominent after the mid 70s. They reemerged again in the late 80s and early 90s, just like how Crystal talked the other day with the Untouchables. You know, the 80s brought a lot of optimism and patriotism and nationalism back to America. Right, so this genre thrived in the time period because, well, this was a time period where America was growing as this world power. Right after the post-World War II era, suddenly America was top of the world, right up there with the Soviet Union as far as the great world powers. So this was a time period where, you know, patriotism, nationalism was at an all-time high. So what did we do? We looked back in our past, right, at this taming of the frontier that we had. You know, historically speaking, the taming of the frontier was an interesting process. Corey, you're our historian. Have you ever heard of Frederick Jackson Turner's Frontier Thesis about the taming of the West?
I have not, but now I'm interested.
Yeah, the taming of the West has always been a major part of our American identity. In the early 1900s, like well before film was a thing, really. This historian named Frederick Jackson Turner came up with this thesis that said that our entire American identity was predicated on having all of this land out west. And so the process that he traced was just like how we kind of talked about with film noir, right? The cities were corrupt, right? The cities were corrupt, they're overcrowded, they're vile. So what hope did Americans have, especially, or even like what hope did immigrants have to break out of that? Because they moved from England or France or wherever over here. So what hope, if you wanted an escape from that urban environment, where do you go? Well, the Western frontier gave us that, right? It gave Americans a chance for a new beginning. Um, his frontier thesis at the time argued, though, by the end of the 1800s, the West had finally been tamed, right? We went from all the way to California and Oregon. Right? Those places were now fully settled. So this is a time period where the West is finally we no longer have any more places to go, right? All the land's been claimed. So this was kind of like a time period where Americans were kind of freaking out. Like, what do we do now, right? We can't just go west anymore, right? The frontier's been tamed. So, but as far as this, so that's the frontier thesis. But as far as this genre goes, oftentimes it's about the fortitude, the hardiness of these pioneers going west. Definitely the Searchers, it's right. It's the Searchers is about these group of Texans, right, who are trying to claim the American dream and all that out west. But so as far as the motifs of the genre go, we talked about film noir and all that's motifs. Right, the Western genre is also full of motifs. Right, so you have pretty much in all these movies. Another one that I love to teach that I didn't put on the syllabus this time is Shane. I don't know. I'm sure Bill. I'm sure you've seen Shane before. But Shane is another great example of this classic Hollywood Western. But the Western's very formulaic. At least the old classic ones from classic Hollywood were. You always have this gunslinger type of character, and this movie portrayed by John Wayne. So this gunslinger type character always, in this genre that is hard is about being civilized, right? Taming an uncivilized place. So the gunslinger figure is always this figure who exists outside of that. You need that figure in order to tame the West, but that figure, simply put, cannot be assimilated into civilized society after the West is tamed. Right. So in this film, that's especially so, right? Ethan Edwards is he's a very ugly character, right? When it comes to his hatred, like this is a character full of hatred and all this type of stuff. This is a very different role for John Wayne, by the way. John Wayne normally plays this very wholesome type of hero character, right? He's whenever you talk about 50s and 60s westerns, he's the main guy, right? But this is a very different role for him. People oftentimes say he plays himself when he plays the same character over and over, but this movie shows that's not true. But anyway, this whole idea of the front of the gunslinger, right? He can't after the plot's resolved, the gunslinger can't stick around, right? So he usually rides off into the sunset at the end, right? That's kind of the classic motif with the end of a Western. And in this movie, it's beautiful. That's beautifully represented with the final shot, which we will talk about in a second. This final shot of this movie is iconic, right? The iconic final shot in this with the camera work. Well, you always usually have different plots emerging. So this is a movie about Native Americans. The whole plots with Native American. Sometimes they were played by Native American actors, like as you saw in this movie with Scar. Scar was played by like this Eastern European Jewish actor, right? So he definitely was not Native American. But we'll talk about that a little bit today, of course, too. but oftentimes you had plots with that, with Native Americans or ranchers. You guys know, you guys might know a lot of the historical conflicts between ranchers and homesteaders, right? The ranchers were the real true original cowboys, right? But they would herd cattle through all these lands, and then once these homesteaders tried to set up farms, right, that set up a lot of conflict. So oftentimes you'll have the farmers versus the homesteaders type of conflict. And of course, you always the Western genre is definitely got classical costuming and things like that. You know, usually the bad guys in black. You know, the gunslinger is usually in white or light collars. Right, so that's another motif of the genre. Yeah, I mean, Hollywood made this. These were cheap to make. All right, so that's one reason why that there was so many of them. They were popular. Um, John Ford, the director of this one. Ford's the only director in this class. We get two movies. No, the Coen brothers. We'll get two movies from them too. But Ford was the go-to director for these big budget Western films. He of course he already did The Grapes of Wrath. We know about that film, but he was the go-to guy. We see lots of good camera work and things like that in this movie. The guy was an artist, right? He made very commercial movies that made a lot of money, but at the same time he was an artist as well. It's hard to dispute that. So, but another great one that I would recommend that he did this is another movie that broke my heart to cut off the syllabus. Is The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. That's another iconic film that he did, and that one's got Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, and Lee Marvin. So that's another great. That movie is about the end of the West and how the frontier thesis and how civilization, how we no longer have a place to go anymore. That's what that movie is about.
Lee Marvin is tremendous in that movie, by the way.
He's excellent. Yeah,
he is. He's one.
Yeah, it hurts my soul to cut that movie off the syllabus, right? But that'll probably. I cut Shane last semester for Westerns. I did Shane, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Unforgiven. This time I'm doing 3 different movies. This, Once Upon a Time in the West, and No Country for Old Men. So that's their sequence this time. So I'm mixing it up for myself, I suppose.
2 movies I've always wanted to watch, 2 Westerns I've always wanted to watch is Unforgiven and Outlaw Josie Wales. I've heard they're both amazing.
Yeah, Unforgiven.
They are.
Unforgiven's an awesome movie. I mean, that movie is very self-reflective of the genre, right? Like, so one of the things we'll talk about today is violence. Right. Well, Unforgiven's all about violence, right? It shows violence has consequences, right? And in these old westerns, these characters have gunfights without any remorse, right? And Unforgiven's a very moody movie, right? About the consequences of violence and whatnot. So I would recommend that one for sure. It was on my syllabus last semester. Yeah. So, but anyway, getting back to The Searchers. I guess now's the time for me to turn the floor over to you guys. What was your thoughts with The Searchers? Your initial impressions? Even you guys can even tell me a little bit about your experience with westerns. Like, have you grown up watching them? Maybe on TV. Even stuff like Gunsmoke, the TV show. Like, What's your experiences with this genre, even in this film?
Well, I don't really have a history because I'm still watching them. I'm still making history. I noticed something about the Gunsmoke attachment to this movie. We know that John Wayne was first given the first shot at being the Gunsmoke Marshal, which was played by James Arness. And John Wayne recommended James Arness for that part. And of course, he's been in Gunsmoke. He was in Gunsmoke for over, 25 years. But we saw one of the characters in The Searchers that was famous on that film, and that was Festus Hagen, which is Ken Curtis is his real name. He was in the Gunsmoke series for a long time. We saw him as Charlie, the guitar playing girl stealer. We saw him in that. We saw a little bit of humor in that. I know that I think some of the classmates will talk about humor. At least I read their thoughts on it. The only place that I think Corey mentioned that he laughed at all was during that fight with Charlie and the guy that was in love with the girl. Well, yeah, but as far as westerns go, I think we learn a lot from them. I think they're wonderful. I like them. Now the spaghetti westerns and a movie like this is a little different, but certainly John Wayne is an icon. He could have played anything. He was a western, but he also played in some war movies. I was disappointed in this movie. I have to be honest. I think if I would have just watched this movie as a viewer and not someone that was kind of critiquing it, I would have put it way up there. But I saw what I thought for me were a few flaws. My favorite part of the movie was not the plot. It was the what we saw in the scenes, the place that it was filmed, the costumes, the characters. I think that was my favorite part. And while I'm talking, and I'll be quiet here in just a second, my favorite part of the movie was when the Indians are on one side of the hill and on the other side of the hill, and the Rangers are right in the middle, and they're just walking. They're not even galloping on their horses, they're just walking. And we knew that there was going to be a time bomb, right? That's what Crystal taught us last week about Hitchcock saying that there was a time bomb effect. You knew that there was going to be a time bomb, but the camera allowed us to watch this scenery for several minutes. And we got to see the openness of that, the big rock formations. And then suddenly he gives the cry, let's go. And they took off like a bat out of a cave, and they were on their way. But I think that was one of my favorite scenes. But all in all, it was an okay movie for me because I love westerns, and but there are some places that I was disappointed. But like I say, I did like the visuals and the scene work.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Bill. A lot of these old movies were filmed in Monument Valley, Utah, right? Which
Yeah.
is now a national park you can go to.
Where this is.
But all these great like rocks, formations, and all this stuff, that's Monument Valley. It's a place it's on my bucket list to go to. I got to go there someday. But
I watched the movie yesterday. It was the first time I got my parents to watch a movie with me, and because I know that they were like they're not like John Wayne fans, but like my dad used to watch westerns with his mom and stuff like that. And I was like, if y'all want to watch a movie with me, let's watch this one. And he said that right after, like I was gonna kind of explain to them how the class works, and afterwards you give us discussions. The first thing he said before I even checked what questions were there was, "This movie was in a beautiful place. Just every single shot was beautiful." And to what Bill said about the scene where you have the Indians on this side and the Indians on this side, and you have everybody just going forward. That is a beautiful shot. I absolutely loved that. And speaking of which, I think I know which one of the scenes that George Lucas stole, and it was when they're coming home to the house, is it not?
Yep.
That's what I thought. Nothing else stood out, but when I heard John Wayne say that this was likely a trap to make sure that they could go and burn the house down, I was like, I bet it's the shot where Luke comes home and sees his uncle and aunt dead. I bet money on it. And that's exactly what it was.
That's the one. If you compare the two, it's shot for shot the same. Like he comes in and sees the burning house, and then the reaction on the face. You know, it's exactly the same, like shot for shot. It's an interesting little tidbit there for the Star Wars fans in here.
Other than that, though, the scenes where the mise en scene was really nice. Even like me, who's kind of more focused on the story, was like, nah, this is actually like a really beautiful place. Like,
Yeah.
I would like to vacation here at some point.
Yeah, we get all climates even here, right? We see snow in the movie.
Mhm.
Of course, if somebody says, well, does it snow in Texas? Well, yeah, it does. We found that out.
Yeah, for sure.
Found that out this past week.
I was surprised too. Was this film made in 1956? Is that right? When was this film made?
It was filmed in 55 and came out in 56. Yeah.
Okay, in 56. I was surprised by I thought the color was very good in this movie. That jumped out at me the first couple of scenes. I think it was the first scene inside the house. I thought, man, this color in this movie is bright, and it was maybe because we've been watching a lot of black and white movies, which I love anyway, but I did pay attention to that color. I thought it was something to make a comment on.
Yeah.
I thought the same. Oh, sorry.
Now you go ahead, Regan.
I was just going to say, I thought the same thing. I felt like that really added to the scenery and stuff. As soon as the movie came on, I was like, wow, this is so beautiful. It's the first thing I noted when I was watching it.
Yeah, this is an interesting, even comparing the two Ford films we've seen, The Grapes of Wrath and this, right? We saw how he filmed in black and white, and we saw how he filmed in color. So interesting, even comparing these two. I remember when we talked about The Grapes of Wrath, like I remember Crystal saying, like when they got to California, she could even kind of like see the color, even though it was in black and white. So like imagine if that movie was in color, right? So you know what Ford can do with it.
I liked the movie as far as the storyline. I thought that some of the scenes were, you could tell they were majorly artificial. But now the outside, like the big rock formations and stuff, you kind of felt that was real. I thought poor little Martin, I didn't think he was a very good actor. I thought he overreacted too much. But but I did like it. And then the more that I read on this movie, and I seen that the book that this was based on was actually based from some true stories that had happened, and one from this little girl, Cynthia Parker, that was 9 years old whenever she was abducted and would stayed there. I forget, I put it in my thread, 20 some years, 22, 24 years. She ended up marrying a war chief and having 3 children. So when her uncle spent his whole life and most of his fortune out looking for her and finally found her, he picked her up and took her back home against her will. So I thought that the what we had talked about before about racism and just certain times, like I thought that really jumped out to me big time in this movie. You know, from the time that whenever Martin first walked in and he said, "Well, you could pass for a half breed," and nobody even had a look on their face as to be like, "How dare you say that?" or "I can't, don't say that here," whatever. It was just the norm. And um just the hatred that they had for him whenever Ethan was ready to kill Debbie because she wanted to stay. He'd rather see her dead than be with the Indians. But in the end, like I felt like his love prevailed, and um, he scooped her up and told her, "Let's go home." And yeah, I thought it also set a test to the time as far as like whenever you write a letter, how long it took for them to get the letter. We just automatically think nobody writes letters anymore, but if they do, it's email. But it don't just take 2 or 3 days. I mean, it took weeks to get to him. He had been gone for years, and what was her name, Laurie or Laura or something? She was just tore up waiting on him all the time, and it just took so long to get anything into any kind of communication. So therefore, they were probably out doing a lot of endless hunting. Whenever if they would have had direct communication with some people, maybe they would have been able to get some information a little bit sooner. But I mean, as far as the storyline and stuff of the movie, I did like it. And the more, like I said, the more that I done research on it and read on it, the more I actually did like it, because I love true stories anyway. And this was out of, I think it was 64, 62 um, kidnapping cases where people had been abducted and then they actually resided with the Indians, and it actually told about the battles and things that these people had went through. So I mean, maybe their racism, I hate to say their racism, maybe their hatred was a little bit justified in the fact that I would hate to be looking out my window all the time, scared to death that another race is coming in, regardless of who it is. They're going to come in and they could take me and my mom at any time and take us out here and either scalp us, kill us, or take us in to, force us into marriage or having children or whatever the case. So, I mean, I can see that hatred a little, but I didn't live it. So maybe I would have seen it a lot if I would have been in that time. But I mean, as far as the whole movie, I did enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. Just to build off your comment, Crystal. Historically speaking, this was a very common thing that happened in the 16, 17, and 1800s. Right? Native Americans would often capture these people, right, and try to integrate them into their society. So, like, they had lots of these Native American communities had very different ideas of kinship and family than white Europeans did. They oftentimes thought that you could be adopted into the family and then be like a daughter or a sister or a wife or something like that. So this happened so much that there was this, as far as literature goes, there was a whole genre of literature from the 16 to the 1800s about captivity narratives. You would have these people who had been captured, and then they would write about their experience after the fact. Um, One of them's name was Mary Jemison, but she was a person like you talked about. She was with natives for like 20 years or something. And then she had to come. Then she came back and wrote about her experiences and stuff. So
It reminds me.
Go
It
ahead.
reminds me a lot of Dances with Wolves. Like when I seen her all grown up and wanting to stay with them, it really reminded me like big time of Dances with Wolves. And I didn't ever think that I would actually see that plot again because I thought that was like a pretty unique thing, but apparently it was a lot more common than I thought.
Yeah, the number of movies I've seen it in isn't very big, but as far as the number of books I've read, yeah, it's ton and ton of it. So you take, I'm sure when you take some classes in early American history and stuff, I'm sure you'll read all about that kind of thing. So Crystal also kind of segued us over into talking about the plot, especially like the race stuff. Yeah, this movie, goodness gracious, right? I mean, this movie does a lot of interesting stuff with race. One of the things that I've always been fascinated about with the movie is this idea that race isn't necessarily the color of your skin, right? This movie's very radical for the time in showing this, right? So we talked about this idea of Native American kinship and whatnot. Well, this movie shows that race is also cultural, right? It's not just based on the pigment of your skin. It's very cultural too. One of the iconic scenes of this movie. I can show it to you guys if you want. But you guys probably remember the one. It's the one where John Wayne and Ethan and yeah, both of the Martin, right? Ethan and Martin go into this place where there's two young girls who they just recaptured back from the natives, and they're both white as I am, right? Right, and they are not white anymore, right? John Wayne says that. He says they are not white anymore. Right? He has this like look of extreme like hatred on his face. The guy deserved an Oscar just for that scene, I think. Like this look of hatred on his face, right? Just for just because these two girls, even though they're young and innocent, right? They're culturally speaking, they're now Indians, right? They're not white anymore. They're Indians. So, of course, the whole plot with Debbie, right, becoming assimilated, right? That's part of the tension at the end too. Is this really hateful guy going to actually kill her, right? You guys know that probably wasn't going to happen in a formulaic western, right? But still, the movie sets that up. Like this guy might actually do it. So yeah, so much to say about race in Ethan, right? So the idea that it's cultural, but also like this guy hates Indians so bad, right? He's willing to damn them in the afterlife, right? The great scene in the near the beginning where he shoots out the eyes of the dead body, right? Just so that he can't see where he's going in the afterlife. So he's damned to like this hell, this type of hell, right? So what he's
And he knew them. He knew their traditions. He knew these people. It was amazing in the movie. Ethan it's almost as though he has lived with them because he knows so much about him. Now, he came out of the war, but it wasn't I don't know how many Indians he had fought, but he certainly knew their customs, what they were to do, what they were going to do. In one of the comments that was made by one of the classmates, can't remember who it was, he said that it's like he could see things. He knew things about them before that was going to happen. So this character is equipped to go after this niece, even if he has to do it by himself. So yeah, he definitely has their lingo. He definitely knows who they are. I'm wondering why he had this hatred toward them so much. but perhaps it was just life in general in the West at that time.
What do some of the rest of you guys think about this Ethan character, especially the hatred and whatnot that he shows?
He even knew how to speak their language, and they were like, how do you know this? I was taught. Well, was you taught this? Um, he knew when to show his cards and when not to. Whenever they walked in and they seen Debbie for the first time, and she's bringing up over all these scalped heads, the wigs or whatever you want to call it. He was like, Martin wanted to immediately react, and he was like, don't. This is not the time, not the place. We have to go gather ourselves. Whenever he was with the preacher slash ranger, and he said that he was just going to go on his own because there was either too few men or not enough men. He knew his battles. He knew how to pick those battles, and he knew how to react in each one of the situations. And maybe it was his experience from being out traveling so much and being in the wars. But I was super impressed with the character. I mean, he always kept his cool. He didn't really get too crazy or too hot-headed. And I couldn't have imagined anyone but John Wayne playing this part. His voice and just his look, how he carries himself is just iconic. I thought he done an amazing job.
Just really quick, I want one of you guys to ask me, will I give you an extension on your essay? One of you guys asked me that.
We have an extension on our essay.
That'll be the day.
I thought we were going to get it there. That was good.
I thought, well, he's feeling sorry for us and he's going to give us some more time, but we have to ask him so that he can literally say, well, I had somebody ask me.
No.
You got me with that one, Dr. Yeager.
I had to give a John Wayne joke there. So
He comes into our into our minds in this movie angry. When he gets off of the horse, he's angry. He comes in, people he hasn't seen for a long time, and they say, well, here's the prodigal. That gives us an insight that he's been gone for quite a while. And maybe he didn't turn out like everybody thought he was going to. Another thing, if you remember, after the killing, the initial first killing, when they come back, the men come back and they go up on the hill and they're going to have the funerals. And the ranger preacher is up there and he's praying. And Ethan says these words, he says, there's no more time for praying. And in the midst of all this heartache, he wasn't crying, he was angry. And he was going to get revenge. So that was something that stuck out to me. His compassion had left him. It's time to kill now. It's time to get to the bottom of this.
Another layer to his character to mention. Here's again classic Hollywood subtlety. Did any of you guys notice any sexual tension between Ethan and his brother's wife near the beginning? Any of you guys know?
Yes, that's a question I had to present because there was something there in her eyes and his. Wow.
Agreed. When I was watching this yesterday, my mom literally said, so that's his wife. And then when it was, we literally found out as a group that she was his sister-in-law after the fact. Because I thought it might have been his mom. She thought it might have been his wife. Nobody thought that it was the wife of the brother-in-law.
Maybe there's a reason they called him the prodigal brother then.
I definitely seen that, and I thought the same thing, Corey, that your mom did. I was like, "Oh, that must be his wife," because she was so excited, yet trying to keep herself together, and then everybody else was losing their mind. It's like, Ethan's home, Uncle Ethan, whatever, and you could just feel that. And then whenever the brother walked into the room after he threw him that coin, said he wasn't going to be staying for free or freeloading, however he stated that. And his brother walked into the bedroom and shut the door, and he's out on the porch with the dog. Like, that was just kind of a scene too that kind of got me, like, maybe they had an affair or something at one time, or maybe they were young lovers and then the brother stole her away while he was gone to war. I mean, that's the kind of thing that was going through my head.
Yeah, there's the whole like really subtle scene where he kisses her on the forehead and stuff. Yeah. Kirsten just wrote a comment. She says,
Yeah.
I thought Debbie might be his daughter rather than the niece because he was more willing to go after her than Lucy. So, yeah, you definitely didn't read wrong into that, Kirsten. I think the movie raises that for sure. He gave Debbie his medal, right? Which is interesting there too.
Mm-hmm.
It's also been insinuated that Martin is Ethan's son as well. That's often been insinuated as well. I think the case for Debbie's stronger, but some folks reading that Martin might be his son too.
Hey, I may have missed a part, but whenever he was talking about the hair that was on the stick, the people that had been scalped, and he said that was your mother's hair. Whenever Ethan said that to Martin, so did he know who Martin's parents were?
Yeah.
Did I miss that?
Yeah, near the beginning, he says that he found Martin after his parents were murdered. He found Martin, he said.
Right. I mean, I remember that part, but I didn't know that they like knew each other. Like, I thought that he may have just been some child that they didn't know who the parents were, but they were gone or whatever. So I just making sure I didn't miss something major there.
It's possible that Ethan might have just made it up to kind of get him to understand the point, maybe. I don't know for sure, but it's a possibility.
Right? If Martin really is Ethan's son, and then he goes around calls him a half breed and everything else, right? That's even more hateful on Ethan's part. Right? Right?
Well, yeah, because that would have meant the people that he hated the most that he would have laid with. So what does that say for him and his cause and his fight for whatever he's fighting for at the moment?
Something that really confused me in this movie was how Debbie wanted, the whole movie up until the end, Debbie wanted to stay and Ethan wanted to kill her. And then all of a sudden it's the other way around. Like, what was the turning point? What, it didn't even show anything about it. It was just like, oh, okay, she's willing to go home and he loves her and wants to keep her and not kill her. Like, what how did that come to that? I was so confused by that.
That was after Scar was killed, though. So was it Scar that, he knew that he would be fighting for the wife that he had took in her? I mean, that's kind of how I took it, that he knew that Scar was going to fight for her because he had made her his wife. But once Scar was killed by Martin and then scalped by Ethan, then it was just like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just take her home. Maybe she wouldn't be so brainwashed or so scared now that Scar's gone. That's kind of how I took it, Reagan, but I'm not sure, babe.
Right. I felt like it probably needed some more development in that area.
Mm.
I felt it was lacking a little bit. And that was something that I didn't really like about the movie. It felt like it was kind of rushed in a lot of places.
Yeah, I agree with Reagan on the rushing part of the movie. That's one incident. And there's another incident where they are riding, it's Ethan and Martin are riding, and they pass up one of the guys that were he was holding his saddle in the desert, and they keep riding, and they get to the house on the horseback, and it's just almost immediately, though he was on foot, he's there. So that was one of my criticisms too, is that I thought there was a few things that happened there that wasn't just right. But at the same time, the time factor went for some 5 years, and I liked the way that they brought about the time change. They used weather, they used the riding times going from place to place, and they also used the snow scene. If you remember, it's snowing, and then the very next scene, which is quickly, it's spring again. So they used those things to allow us to understand that many years have passed, not just days or weeks.
That's good filmmaking, right? Because lots of times this movie will just be like 2 years later or something.
Yeah. That's right. Even today they do that.
Yeah, Regan, I agree. I agree with Bill and everybody else that the whole part about Ethan's heart suddenly softening, it didn't seem right, right? That his heart suddenly softened. I mean, this was just a scene after he was scalping people, right? So yeah, that it didn't seem quite right. Um, so yeah, a possible weakness in the writing of the movie.
I love how that no matter what camp that he went into or tribe or whatever they're called, um, that he would know exactly which TP to go to and go exactly to the right spot very first time. Like he didn't have to go through and sort his way through, which obviously didn't bring out a bunch of attention. If he would have had to sort through people or be checking in different TPs, he would have brought about more attention, and it would have been more of a war on just him and Martin. But it wasn't like that. He always just seemed to know. Now that could have been, him getting information from different people, knowing where to go and what to do. I don't know, but I just thought that was crazy. Like he knew exactly where to go at the exact right time.
What one thing that we haven't talked about yet is Scar, right? We haven't talked about this character of Scar quite yet. I mentioned his casting earlier seemed peculiar. It wasn't too peculiar. Lots of times in these westerns, you did have white actors playing Native American parts. We have Native Americans playing like the like extras roles, like in the big battle scenes and all that. But so part of me too thinks that this casting wasn't accidental. One of the things that people often say about this movie is Ethan and Scar are the same person. Right? They're the same they're mirror images of each other. Um, you guys, I don't know if you guys remember the scene when they first interact. They have this little dialogue with each other. Scar says, "You speak pretty good Comanche, right? For an American." And then, like at the end of the exchange, John Wayne says, "You speak pretty good American for a Comanche," right? So that's one of these great scenes that are used to show that hey, maybe these two have the same soul, even right? They're the same like ruthless type of character. Um, if you look at it that way, it takes away from Scar even being a villain of the movie. I mean, both of them are equally monstrous in a way. So I don't know. So thoughts on this Scar character? What'd you guys make of this character?
He
Don,
didn't. I don't
I
know.
haven't heard from you today. What do you think about this Scar character?
I didn't really find Scar to be that interesting, like the most interesting villain of any story. In my opinion, he was more so average comparatively to other villains in the modern day films, because you don't really see a whole lot of him throughout the story until you see him once at the beginning, and then you see him a couple times near the end of the movie. You don't really get to see too much of him. I think he would have been a better character if he actually got more screen time than, like, I think the 10 or 15 minutes he actually got.
Right.
Ron stole my point.
Just the lack of screen time detracted from his character a little bit.
Yeah, he didn't. He just seemed very just I felt indifferent towards him because he wasn't very much in the movie. He only had a couple lines. I mean, pretty like I'd say half of this guy's screen time was him staring off into the distance.
Well, too, if we put, if we're watching the film and we're on the outside looking in, we could count him as a villain. If we're on his team and we've lived his life and we've had taken from us what he had taken from him, he wouldn't be a villain at all. He would be a person that was maybe perhaps a hero to his own kind, because he was maybe taking revenge up for every Indian that had been killed or every Indian that had been taken. Because he makes that comment somewhere that, it was, there's been Indians killed. And so I think he's more, less than a villain, but more of an avenger. I think he's avenging the loss of maybe some maidens or squaws and kids that had been killed by even the cavalry, maybe.
That goes back to Chris, where she's like, you can really see, like you can see John's point. You could also see the Indians' point of how you just be would untrusting of an entire race because at least over half of the experiences you've had with them have been bad, and both of them see each other as the aggressor, and they both almost use preemptive strikes even, and it just makes them both out to be the bad guy.
It's a good point, Corey. And as far as Scar goes, I kind of thought that he was built up a lot more. I mean, I agree with Ryan on that. Like, he was built up. People were talking about him. They were searching for Scar for this length of time. I was picturing before he got on my screen, I was picturing this big Indian, this big, huge headdress down to the ground, one not to be messed with, like one that you could not overcome. He was the king of kings, so to speak. But whenever we see him, he's this little thin guy. He would actually, I would have mistaken him for one of his other in his tribe. He didn't really stand out. I mean, yeah, his scar did, but that was all that I felt that was distinctive about him as they built him up so much. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't have a great mind or he wasn't in his rightful place is the way he felt. But as far as a physical appearance, I was expecting something far more great than what I actually seen.
Perhaps that scar had something to do with his feelings and his thoughts. Perhaps his prejudice came out of the things that he has endured. If we think about it for just a moment, we're normally not prejudiced against people that we live with or that are the same color or same dialect or same area. something leads to that prejudice. I believe if you raise two babies, a black baby, a red baby, or three babies, and a white baby, up and they were raised together and never entwined with any other people, I don't believe that they would have that prejudice. I believe it comes from our experiences. So I think that this guy certainly has his issues for sure, because he's taken them to another level for sure.
That's all good points about this guy. I agree. His physical presence isn't really felt. I don't think. Um, he's got these blue eyes, right? That's another reason why um, he's often showed as Ethan's mirror image, right? That's another
Mm.
it's another visual cue that people often cite when talking about this character. One
Do
last,
we?
or go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say before the class ended today, because it goes by so fast, it seems like. Do we? Where does stunt people fit into this in some ways? Because I saw something in this film that registered something with me, is with the. I know we talk about actors, actresses, and we talked about screenplay, and we talked about this and that, but somewhere along the line, somebody's really riding that fallen horse, and that person that falls in the river, and another horse is on him. I wonder how much of a part that plays in these type movies.
I actually saw something before class on a YouTube video I looked at that I never learned before. Pretty close to the end, during Lori's wedding scene to the supposed to be wedding to the jokester guy, right? John Wayne goes to the bar to get a drink, and there's these three people that come up next to him. Those were his three stunt doubles in the movie. So he's filmed in one shot. It's him and his three stunt doubles, which I thought,
That's wild.
yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
but
Well,
yeah,
the scene that I'm talking about, and that's very interesting. The Indians are coming across the river, and we're firing at them from this side, and there is a scene where a guy falls forward over a horse and goes into the water, and another horse is just, there's several around that scene, if you remember that scene. And I was just thinking about that, because I met a stuntman one time, and he's very interesting to talk to. But it is a part of our movies. It's a part that is there for sure.
yeah, I'm glad you raised this. It's something those are types of roles we normally take for granted. But there's an artistry to being a stunt double, right? To throw off that illusion that it's the same person. Sometimes actors do their own stunts, um, but not pretty rare. Pretty rare. It takes a pretty bold one to do that.
I always think about Jackie Chan when I think about an actor that does his own stunts. If you've ever seen him, I think he was a part of an old school that basically used to teach stunt doubles in China, and they broke bones. They like had pretty bad injuries, like nonstop.
Yeah, I know. Recently, in the James Bond films, Daniel Craig tries to do his own stunts. He gets hurt all the time trying to do his own stunts. One last thing I wanted to talk about today, Corey. I didn't get a chance to read your discussion post, but Bill alluded earlier that you wrote about humor in the movie. You want to tell us what you said?
Yeah, I was basically just in the three examples that you gave, which were uh, Martin's wife and Lori's fight and Mose. I don't know what Mose's character was supposed to be. If he was supposed to be regularly drunk or if he was supposed to be disabled. I'm trying to tread lightly here because the thing that struck me as what they were supposed to be funny was his voice. And it felt uncomfortable to me. Like I would laugh a couple times, but it would be like, well, are you supposed to laugh type of thing? But the thing with uh, the thing with her with look, everything about her just kind of had me on ease or on edge because like just her whole thing about her being obsessive and trying to sit next to him, trying to sleep next to him, and he kicks her down the hill. I was like, oh geez. I laughed, but it just was like, oh, that's rough. The only scene where I laughed was towards the end with Lori. And the only part that I found funny was like they're going out and they're getting ready to have this fight, and one says after you, and the other goes like after you, and they both have this angry face while they're like, no, after you, like being very gentlemanlike. And then they finally go outside and he's like, can you help me with my jacket? And he's like, sure, and he takes it off. It reminded me a lot from a scene from The Office. It looked like a scene Dwight would have with somebody in the office.
I love after they fight, it gets a close up of Lori's face. She's like, yeah, like
Yeah.
loving them fighting.
Yeah, she's so happy. I thought that part was funny too, Corey, because I was like, look at how situated they're getting to go fight. Like, I'm going to get this piece of firewood and I'm going to set it down right here. We're getting all situated here. We're going to get things organized.
I thought when he grabbed the wood, he was going to hit him with it at first, and then he lays it down. So that was a little odd. About that character, by the way, that is played by King Curtis, I think it's Charlie. It's funny. He's playing the guitar in it, and he really sang with the Sons of the Pioneer, which was a folk group back in the day, a very famous folk group if you were into folk music. But Crystal made the point because we were talking about it. She said, yeah, he comes in here and he's talking right like this. And then all of a sudden he comes up, hola, he has this nice voice and he's, singing that song that he sang. So it was pretty interesting. I thought how he used his talents from one thing and brings them into movies and Gunsmoke for that matter.
I also like the part that in Lori's house, right there by the fireplace, you've got the big bench seat. In two different scenes, someone got knocked backwards over that. Martin was in both of those scenes, but I just thought that was funny that was the piece of prop that was definitely going to fall backwards and there was going to be some type of physical altercation.
Yeah, going back to Corey's point about the scenes with look, right? The, those scenes haven't aged well, right? To say the least. But the movie's even kind of aware of its own messed up humor, right? Because a couple of scenes later, Look is dead, right? So it's a little twisted, those scenes. I tell you what was fun. I once showed this movie to a class. Like, I actually played the movie in class and like listening to people laugh and stuff. I'm just like, it's an interesting sociological experiment, right? Just to like gauge the audience reaction while watching these scenes. I laugh during the scenes. Maybe that makes me a horrible person. I don't know, but I laugh during the scenes. So,
Well,
The saddest. Oh, go ahead, Corey. I'm sorry.
you're good. I was gonna put in my discussion that if I laugh at a scene that's not supposed to be, or that's supposed to be offensive or whatever, or that is offensive, but it's supposed to be funny, and I laugh, then I laugh. I mean, I feel bad about it afterwards, but I laugh. But none of them really caught me funny until that last scene.
Maybe it shows us that humor gets to the brain quicker than it gets to the heart.
Right.
So we're naturally have the, we naturally, if we see something funny, hey, I hate to admit this, but I've laughed at a funeral before, and that sounds really terrible for a person to do so. But sometimes there are funny things that happen, and your emotions take over really what you ought to be doing. So I think it's a lot like this movie. It could offend us that he kicked that poor little lady over the hill. And I mean, she rolled, buddy. She rolled like a 55-gallon drum. But I'm like, so if laughing makes us bad people, I'm guilty, and I certainly don't want to be classified as that.
Seems like a nice place to end it for the day on some laughs. So just to give you guys a preview for next Tuesday's movie, Once Upon a Time in the West. So this is a spaghetti western that was made in Italy, right? This is made by the great Sergio Leone. So one way that I want you to, this is a very long movie. Give yourself plenty of time to watch it. It's not Apocalypse Now long, but it's pretty long. But the way that I want you to think about this movie going in, think about it like it's Western opera, right? Western opera. It's very melodramatic. The the music in this movie is extraordinary, right? It's made by the great Ennio Morricone, who did the music for The Untouchables last time too. But he and Leone are known for their collaborations in these spaghetti westerns. Like these movies are grounded in their soundtrack. So think about that as you're watching. Just enjoy the cinematography in this. Like you got talked about the searchers and the beautiful scenes. This movie's cinematography is out of the world. Like Leone is my favorite director of all the directors we're doing in this class because he's very visual. Like you guys know how in movies you have exposition. Leone never gives exposition. He lets the movie, the picture, tell you everything. So that's something to consider. He likes to draw things out, like the ticking time bomb. He loves to draw things out like that. It's like a character. These characters might like have a stare down for like 5 minutes, right? He loves to do stuff like that. Most of these movies had Clint Eastwood in them. This is the one that doesn't. We have Charles Bronson instead. He's just as good as Clint Eastwood was in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and stuff. This movie is about the end of the West, the decline of the frontier. The mythology fading away in the reality. So that's kind of what the basic plot is. It has, you guys will know, it has one of the, I'm not even going to spoil it, but the reason why I did this movie instead of Good, the Bad, and the Ugly this semester is because we also watched The Grapes of Wrath. And there's a moment near the beginning of this movie that'll take you by surprise because a certain actor shows up, and it's suddenly a very different role for him. So as I mentioned, it's related to The Grapes of Wrath, so you guys can probably figure out who I'm talking about here. So watch out for that. This movie has a great performance by. Usually westerns are very male dominated, but a woman is the lead character in this movie too, played by Claudia Cardinal. Right, so she plays extraordinary heroine in this movie too. So I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say about her. So take your time with it, enjoy it. If you're not a patient person, you might not like this movie. but it's the king of the genre, like the spaghetti western. It's very different from what we watch today. So I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say about it. Have you ever seen this movie before, Bill? Once Upon a Time in the West. Oh, you're in for a treat.
Yeah, this is one I haven't seen. I love Charles Bronson too. He's a tough character. He's a tough guy. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you're in for a treat for this movie. Usually, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the spaghetti western everybody thinks about. I like this movie better personally. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is more iconic, but yeah, this movie is his best, I think. So I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say.
Mhm.
All right, guys. So we're over time. So until next time, take care.
Thank you.
Welcome.